They weren't after gold, nor diamonds, nor the spoils of a looted bank vault. They were after a prize far more valuable, far more dangerous: the corpse of Abraham Lincoln. The night of the great grave robbery. The air hung heavy and humid over the prairies of Illinois in 1876, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and late summer decay. It was an ordinary moonless night in November, but beneath the deceptive quiet of the season, a truly extraordinary crime was brewing. Springfield, the quiet capital of Illinois, slept soundly, unaware that in the shadows of its grandest monument, the Lincoln Tomb at Oak Ridge Cemetery, a conspiracy of monumental audacity was about to unfold. The plot's architect, a smooth-talking, fiercely ambitious Chicago saloon keeper named Jim Canally, was no ordinary criminal. Canally was a kingmaker in the shadowy realm of counterfeit currency, a business that ran on secrecy, skill, and, in the event of an arrest, the ability to corrupt or coerce. His most gifted engraver, a master counterfeiter named Benjamin Boyd, had recently been captured and locked away in Joliet Penitentiary. Boyd's loss was crippling. Canally's syndicate, known as the Chicago Bunch, was facing ruin. Traditional bribes had failed. A jailbreak was impossible. Canally needed leverage, something so immense, so shocking, that it would force the entire nation's hand. And then the impossible idea struck him. He would steal the body of the great emancipator. His plan was simple in its barbaric genius. Break into the tomb, extract the body of Abraham Lincoln, transport it to the Indiana dunes, and bury it deep in the sand. Then he would send a simple, terrifying ransom note to Robert Todd Lincoln, the former president's son. Release Benjamin Boyd, or the body of your father will disappear forever. To execute this sacrilege, Canally hired two small-time thugs, Terrence Mullen and Jack Hughes. Mullen was a hulking, simple-minded man whose main asset was brute strength. Hughes was a nervous, wiry man whose hands were far steadier with a crowbar than a gun. Neither of them possessed the intellect to grasp the sheer scale of the crime they were undertaking, nor the danger they were courting. They were only interested in the promise of a substantial cash reward. On the evening of November 7th, 1876, Election Day, a night when the entire nation's attention was fixed elsewhere, the trio boarded a train to Springfield. 2. The Informer. What Canally, Mullen, and Hughes did not know was that they had attracted the attention of a formidable adversary, the newly formed United States Secret Service. The Secret Service, established during the Civil War, had a primary mandate far removed from protecting the president, a job that would only officially be assigned to them after McKinley's assassination. Their primary, all-consuming mission was to combat the plague of counterfeit currency, a crime wave that had nearly crippled the post-war American economy. Ben Boyd was one of their greatest catches, and they would not let him go. Leading the Chicago branch of the Secret Service was Patrick D. Tyrrell, a shrewd Irish-born detective whose instincts were as sharp as his wit. Tyrrell had been tracking the Chicago Bunch for years. When a known member of Canally's ring, a man named Louis Swegels, suddenly volunteered to join the grave-robbing team, Tyrrell saw an opportunity he could not ignore. Swegels, a horse thief and amateur grave robber with a talent for exaggeration, was secretly Tyrrell's informant. He had been lured into the plot by Canally, who saw him as the necessary expert in the art of the steal. Swegels was in fact
the Secret Service's eyes and ears inside the most heinous criminal plot in American history. Tyrrell's plan was to let the thieves make their move, and then, at the moment they successfully exhumed the coffin, spring the trap and catch them literally red-handed. The legal offense of merely planning a body theft was minor. The offense of committing it was a state felony that would guarantee a long prison sentence. 3. The approach to Oak Ridge. The Lincoln Tomb was a place of national pilgrimage, a massive granite structure guarded by a heavy iron fence. Inside, the president's sarcophagus rested in a marble burial chamber. Schwegels led the thieves to a rented buggy in Springfield and drove them the few miles to Oak Ridge Cemetery. The wind had begun to pick up, and the shadows seemed to deepen around the massive structure. "It's election night," Schwegels muttered, trying to sound encouraging. "Everyone's distracted. Tonight, the only votes that matter are ours." Canale, nervous but determined, stood back, acting as a lookout. Mullen and Hughes, guided by the duplicitous Schwegels, approached the tomb's heavy cast-iron door. The mechanism was old, but the lock was formidable. Mullen produced a bundle of crude tools, chisels, files, and a heavy iron sledge. The noise they made, even muffled by the large tomb structure, sounded deafening in the vast silence of the cemetery. The rhythmic clang of metal against metal sliced the darkness. Schwegels, all the while, was calculating their exact position and progress, his mind reeling with the risk of his double cross. Finally, after nearly an hour of grueling, noisy effort, the thieves managed to file away the lock and pry the iron door open. A rush of stale, sepulchral air wafted out. "In and out, boys," Canale hissed from the shadows. "And remember, if you scratch the casket, I'll scratch your eyes out. We need a clean exchange." Inside, the tomb was darker than a coal mine. The three men, Mullen, Hughes, and Schwegels, shuffled down the corridor to the burial chamber. The great marble sarcophagus that was publicly displayed was merely a decoy. The actual coffin was contained in a massive 10-ton wooden and lead-lined cedar box, resting on a stone floor beneath a removable marble slab. This was the target. Working in a frantic, sweaty silence, the men used their crowbars to wrench the heavy marble slab off its moorings. The slab was designed to protect the coffin, but it was not cemented in place. With a terrible, grinding scrape, it was pushed aside. Beneath it, the enormous, dark cedar box, Lincoln's final resting place, was revealed. It weighed nearly a half-ton. "Now the chains," Mullen whispered, breathing hard. He and Hughes slipped heavy logging chains underneath the coffin, preparing to hook them to their makeshift rigging to drag it out of the chamber. It was precisely at this moment, the moment of maximum vulnerability, when the most powerful man in American history lay exposed and ready to be dragged into the night, that the trap was sprung. 5. The chaos and the flea. The shout, delivered with the full authority of Patrick D. Tyrrell, ripped through the silent tomb. It was meant to freeze the thieves, but it achieved only panic. Mullen, the man of brute strength, let out a terrified roar and instantly dropped the heavy chains. Hughes, the nervy counterpart, reacted with pure instinct, scrambling backward and tripping over the displaced marble slab. The informant, Louis Schwegels, seeing his cover blown by the sudden interruption, Tyrrell's plan had been to wait for the coffin to be fully exposed before arresting them, feigned confusion, shouting, "What in God's name is that?" before sprinting towards the tomb's entrance, seemingly joining the panic-stricken criminals. Tyrrell, along with two other agents, had positioned themselves near the entrance, but they had tragically miscalculated two crucial factors: the immediate layout of the tomb and the sheer terror of the thieves. As Mullen and Hughes bolted, they knew the surrounding area intimately. They scrambled out of the dark chamber and up the steps. Tyrrell's agents, expecting them to freeze or surrender, were caught off guard by their desperate speed. Kennelly, the lookout stationed outside, heard the distant commotion and the sudden authoritative shout. He didn't wait. He abandoned the stolen buggy and vanished immediately into the thick, dark woods surrounding the cemetery, moving like a phantom. He was the only one who truly understood the price of being caught by the Secret Service. Inside the tomb, the chase was a blur. Tyrrell managed to get a grip on the retreating Mullen. "Stop, you scoundrel! You're under arrest!" Tyrrell yelled, grappling with the heavy-set man. Mullen, fueled by desperation and adrenaline, threw an elbow back, striking Tyrrell in the face. The Secret Service agent stumbled backward, momentarily stunned. Mullen and Hughes, along with a theatrical Sweggles, burst through the tomb door and disappeared into the November darkness. The entire confrontation, from Tyrrell's shout to the thieves' escape, lasted perhaps 60 seconds. When Tyrrell recovered and rushed out, all he found was the abandoned iron and marble debris, the heavy chains lying half-hooked beneath Lincoln's coffin, and the empty, cold night air. The body of the former president was safe, but the grave robbers were gone. V.I. The hunt begins. Tyrrell was faced with a professional disaster. He had been so close, yet he had allowed the perpetrators of the most infamous crime in American history to slip through his fingers. The immediate priority shifted from capture to absolute secrecy. The news of the plot could not be released to the press. The sheer shock and public hysteria it would cause, not to mention the political instability, was too great a risk. Tyrrell immediately contacted his superiors and then, discreetly, Robert Todd Lincoln. Robert was horrified but agreed to an absolute news blackout. The hunt became a covert nationwide operation led by the Secret Service, officially looking for counterfeiters but secretly hunting grave robbers. Tyrrell knew his advantage lay in the criminals' greed and their necessary return to Chicago. He also knew his weakest link was the informant. Louis Sweggles, still playing the role of the terrified, escaped thief, managed to make his way back to Chicago. He was meant to provide intelligence on Kennelly's whereabouts, but Sweggles, a habitual liar and self-serving rogue, soon began to complicate matters. He delivered a confusing, often contradictory narrative of the escape to Tyrrell. He claimed Kennelly was still planning the ransom attempt, but couldn't locate him. Meanwhile, Mullen and Hughes, scared and completely penniless, returned to Chicago, hiding out in a cheap boarding house on the city's south side. They were furious with Kennelly, who had vanished with the promised money. They were also terrified of being caught, convinced that the authorities were searching for a dead body, not a live one. Tyrrell began a meticulous slow-motion dragnet. He had to assume that Kennelly would try to restart the plot. He placed known associates under surveillance and followed every thread of the counterfeiting operation. He knew the criminals would seek their reward, and he needed a way to draw them out. 7. The trap is reset. Tyrrell devised a brilliant counterplot. He decided to use the same greed that had motivated the crime to lure the thieves into a second, inescapable trap. He used Sweggles to spread a rumor among the Chicago bunch that Kennelly was back in town and needed an expert to help him with the next phase of the plot, transporting the body out of state. Tyrrell then approached John P. English, the owner of a Chicago saloon that the criminals frequented. English, who was secretly appalled by the plot, agreed to cooperate with the Secret Service. The plan: English would meet with Mullen and Hughes, claim he was acting on Kennelly's orders, and offer them the money they were promised if they agreed to help retrieve the non-existent stolen body from a supposed new hiding place, a place where Tyrrell and his armed men would be waiting. On May 18, 1776, Mullen and Hughes, desperate for the promised cash, took the bait. English met them and told them the job was set for the following night. They were to meet a new contact who had secured a wagon and a remote hiding spot. The two thieves, utterly oblivious that they were being led to their capture by the Secret Service itself, finally believed their fortune was about to turn.
8. The final act. The meeting place was a dusty, abandoned tannery near the Chicago River docks. It was dark, isolated, and perfect for an ambush. On the night of May 19, 1876, Mullen and Hughes cautiously entered the tannery. They were met by the Secret Service agent who was posing as the new contact. As they began to discuss the logistics of the non-existent stolen coffin, Tyrrell and a dozen armed deputies erupted from the shadows. "United States Secret Service, don't move!" This time, there was no escape. Mullen and Hughes were stunned, cornered, and instantly overpowered. The arrests were made without a shot fired. The mastermind, Jim Kennelly, remained at large, but the two men who had physically entered the tomb and disturbed the peace of the nation's great martyr were finally captured. The Secret Service had successfully saved the body of Abraham Lincoln, apprehended the culprits, and maintained the news blackout for 7 full months. The trial that followed was a sensation, but the Secret Service's work was only beginning. The plot had revealed a profound vulnerability in the security of the nation's most sacred resting place, a vulnerability that Robert Todd Lincoln and the American public would soon demand be fixed.